Thank you all for your remarks. I was visiting with some colleagues yesterday, and I told them why I was here, and they said, well, good luck with that. Dealing with ethno-religious conflict or peace building is, a challenging task at best. And I think it's interesting that today, in all of the speakers that we've had, it's been mostly men speaking about the past in a way that I think the opening now is for a different way of thinking about these issues, a different way of negotiating change. And I really appreciate Sister Aisha's presentation and her presence here as so far the single female who's spoken to us. And one of the things that I wanted to ask her was she spoke of difficult questions. We really need to ask ourselves the difficult questions, and that's something that I'm hoping that these 2 days that we have together give us an opportunity to really challenge some of the existing narratives and the places where we circle around and around this idea of similarities and differences, similarities and differences. What are the challenging questions that you alluded to that give us an opportunity to really transform those conversations into something that can make a difference? Thank you.
So you say the challenges of going from this similarity to bringing the differences together, taking the similarities and using that to overcome or bring together the differences. Is that?
I'm interested in knowing what she was referring to in terms of the critical or difficult questions, because I have my own, imaginings of what those are, but my sense was that you were speaking very specifically about something. I'd like to know more about those specifics.
Okay. So.
Okay, well, there are a lot of specifics, unfortunately. So I was just trying to name a few that, because of our own limited capacity and resources, the wheel that's the squeakiest gets the oil. As a practicing Muslim, and I look to my faith to inform my activism, but I am an activist. What that means is that I commit myself to speaking out about things that are clearly wrong based on what I understand to be an open, just society, and it's a world view. So when we see people being utterly dehumanized, we have the majority of the people at the poverty level or below poverty level, while we have a handful of people with all of the wealth and resources. That's a major issue for us. When we talk about reconciliation, often we are talking about the people who are vanquished. We are calling on them to be magnanimous, as opposed to asking the oppressor to take the responsibility for the actions, the injustices that have been inflicted on other people, to own that responsibility and see the world as this pot of plenty where there's more than enough resource for everybody to live a decent, dignified life. So our work says, instead of asking, and both the examples that were referenced here, I think only one actually, South Africa is the other one that I want to reference. We talked about Bosnia. Of course, people grow weary of war, so at some point, they're going to not want to just sacrifice their last child, to the war machine. Those of us who are activists, when the people say, okay, I give up, I don't want any more blood, just stop killing us, the activist has to go now and find another cause to advocate for, because the people have said, I'll sign on the dotted line, just stop bombing us, yeah? So what do we do with that then? But still, the injustice remains. The people in Bosnia are still suffering from inequality, yeah? Likewise in South Africa, we had, Mandela as this powerful example, reconciliation, you know. Yet we have all of the wealth of the country still in the hands of the people who were having the wealth in their hands. And so people are still suffering. So how do we, as people of faith, right? I mean, not necessarily politicians, but now you know, one thing that I'm very cautious about now in this climate is weaponizing religion. Yeah, so let's call all the religious people down and have them sign the guideline, right? And we're also doing the same thing with women, increasingly. That's weaponized women. You know, let them take the responsibility for all of the extremists in the world. You know, they are raising them. So, what is it? What are we, you know, as people of faith? What are we going to do about the mess that we're living in and that we are passing on to our children? And I think that women are really going to have to be at the forefront of this struggle, and hopefully enlightened men will be there to support, you know, our outrageous activism.
A little interruption. My understanding is what you're saying is that peace and reconciliation are not just stopping violence, but you must have a project after that to take care of the aftermath and build a real society. You cannot just stop being enemies. You have to be maybe being engaged citizens for a new society. Is that?
That's certainly a part of it. You know, where there has to be equality. You know, we value this thing we call equality. Then, you know, we have to make that part of the ground rules as well. We can't, you know, give, you know, one side that has all the resources to one group because they're more powerful, and leave the other group, you know, still suffering the same injustices that they were suffering before, minus, you know, running from bullets and drones and things of that sort.
I don't want to speak too much because we have three other panelists who might want to, but you do get the idea that if you just stop the active part of the conflict, you did not do away with the reasons for the conflict. Let me, would anybody else like to comment on this particular?
Well, just as a point of reference, every conflict has to be analyzed on its own basis and its own causes, and no two conflicts are necessarily going to fit into the same box. And so the notion generically that you have to address the root causes of an individual conflict, I don't see how anyone could dispute that. The question is, in any given setting, how do you do that? And how long will it take for you to reach a point where you can say that you've made progress? Because there's no absolute moment where you say, oh, we've reconciled. It's an ongoing dynamic process that can take years, decades, generations, and depending upon the setting in which you're operating. And Sister Aisha is absolutely right. You know, if you still feel aggrieved, you're going to have those feelings, and they're going to pass on from one generation to the next. So there has to be some process by which this happens. And in fact, one of the things that in a post-World War II environment you see more of is this issue of accountability. And again, we're seeing that play out in a dynamic process. In South Africa, you had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, you had tribunals. There are different ways in which the process takes place.
I'm upset that there's no cookie cutter way to do this.
I was just going to point out one example, which is the island of Cyprus. And what it illustrates, it's an easy example to look at, is that sometimes it takes longer to get from, okay, you stop the violence, until you're going to get real reconciliation. It may take a long time or even a generation. So that sometimes the idea that maybe just and may take longer than we would hope to be settled, is a realistic part of eliminating conflict. So I'm sure you agree with what I'm about to say, which is that if it's not people killing each other, at least we get to point one, then we can hope to go on to, obviously, to point who knows how many. But I think in some examples, you see that some of this takes a generation or two, where people have grown up, not part of the actual conflict on an armed violence level.
It doesn't take long to destroy something, but to rebuild it might not be very quick.
Chair of the UNESCO Chair on Women and Their Rights in Rabat. I've listened with a great deal of interest to the 4 presentations, which are all excellent because the topic is tough. The topic is difficult. You've all mentioned the importance of shared values and the importance of education, although sometimes it was understood and not mentioned explicitly. My experience has amply demonstrated that for interfaith dialogue and communication to be concrete, tangible, and to lead to positive results, they have to find their ways into the curriculum. Obviously, here again, it's not an easy task. We have to work on the most adequate pedagogical tools to do that. Because you cannot possibly, I'm sorry, I may give you the impression that I'm sermonizing on a mountain and regurgitating platitudes. I can't possibly imagine someone talking about the possibility of interfaith dialogue without being on very familiar terms with all the religious texts. And Professor Schiffman, correct me if I'm wrong, you have cited references from Al-Quran, obviously the Quran, and I think that it's more than essential, it's crucial. I cannot participate in an interfaith dialogue without having read the Torah and the Bible. And obviously my own Quran, my own the holy book. And I was very impressed by the Dr. Aisha al-Adawiya, whose name reminds me of an important mystique, Rabia, and I'm sure some of you may be familiar with this name, Rabia al-Adawiya. Thank you very much for talking about this Medina Charter, which I myself as a Muslim has never learned about at school or even at university level. These are bits and pieces of information, of scientific information that I have to discover on my own with the help of other colleagues. And I'm confident that these extremist people, jihadist people, have never heard of this Medina Charter, have never heard of the Marrakesh Declaration, just to tell you the importance of education. I'd like to, some of you have mentioned, especially the last participant, Mr. Hodes, yes, the linguistic problems that are very often related to this interfaith communication, the plurality of meanings given to tolerance, which is, as you've tried to show, a pejorative term, because it does not emanate from the guts, as the saying goes. Here, I would linguists, and this is what happened to all religions. Linguists have never been involved in the past in the interpretations of Al-Quran. If you take Islam, for example, only theologians, what we call al-ulama, who have tried their hands at interpreting the Quran. And now, these interpretations are being feminized and womanized, to use Dr. Aisha's words. And here, I conclude with the emergence of an important international NGO of women called Musawat, originated in Philippines, and now they have members from Africa, America, United States, England, Australia, and they are trying their hands at challenging patriarchal interpretations of Islam. And thank you.
You would just like him to respond, because that was a wonderful statement, but I'm not too sure. Would anybody like to respond? You really reinforce them more than anything. Any response?
Pick a human point, which is that there's a wonderful tradition of Arabic philology influencing the interpretation of the Quran. That's what you said. And in fact, Arabic philology gave birth to Hebrew and all Semitic philology, where they discovered the whole grammatical system. And all that was in response to study of the Quran by Muslim experts in Arabic language and grammar. So I just had to, I felt I had to comment on that. So.
Your comment also opens the door to remind me about something relating to interfaith dialogue that I neglected to mention in my remarks, that I think is particularly important for this audience, and which is that we do have case studies that relate to interfaith dialogue processes that have had an impact and have been effective. Again, using the taxonomy of the civil servant and someone involved in peacemaking processes, the strongest line of impact that you can see are in post-conflict societies. And for those of us who have a background in urban life in America, you will understand that some of the greatest of these examples have parallels with community relations boards that one sees functioning in big cities in the United States since the end of the 1960s, where religious leaders in post-conflict societies, you have examples in Uganda, Sierra Leone, Bosnia, Liberia, have actually been able to, because of their legitimacy and because of their credibility within communities, have an important role in tamping down potential tensions in certain situations. Moreover, they are able to do that in part because of their role in the education process. And what do I mean by that? Especially in some of these parts of the world that we're speaking of, it's religious leaders who have the closest relationship to people on the ground, in particular young people. Some of the first schools that anybody will ever attend in parts of the developing world will be schools that are run by religious leaders. And so that aspect can't be ignored. And it also leads into the credibility that then becomes useful in these interfaith dialogue processes that allow communities to talk about their problems rather than fight over them.
May I comment very briefly, please? Yes, language. We are suffering at this point with the use of language, specifically to be used to demonize the other. In this case, the Muslim community, Islam itself. So how do you, new terminology, Islamist, jihadist, Islamism, we are now struggling to understand even what that means. Does that mean us? What is it? Is it code for terrorism? So how, and you don't dare try to get to a classroom trying to sort this out. So how, but it's being used in classroom settings, in academia. Academicians are feeling compelled to adopt the language themselves. So this becomes a very serious challenge to us in terms of how do we educate for a more just society. Yeah. So that's one thing. And how do we manage the proliferation of new language that informs who we are, our own identity? Young people in this culture, for instance, are questioning who they are, even though they were born here, they were raised here, their parents were raised, for a very long time. And because of the demonization, right, and the painful use of language, right, they are questioning who they are, who they belong here, right? And it traumatizes, right? And then we have to look at health implications. So it is very difficult, right? And it's a very big problem that we now, religion is the last frontier. We've done everything else now, so what is it that we can bring as people who are spiritually inclined? What is it that we can bring to help, bring about some relief?
I'd stress as you stress, the importance of the development of identity and what that can do to how people think about their religion and their relationship to others. We have other questions. I think I promised.
Thank you. Thank you for this conversation. I do want to build on what you started with and what you spoke about, and you just said build different relationships with the other. So this is a good segue for the note that I wanted to share with you. Before, there was a talk here after your remark about what is our role or the religion role in building a different way of being together. And you said something about aftermath. Well, I don't believe, and this is not what I heard from you, that our role is to deal with the aftermath. I think we need to think about different ways of being together structurally to make sure that the other is like us, like I-thou relationship. And what type of institutions, structures, social environments can nurture this type of relationship so that we accept the other as we legitimize ourselves. And this is like a more sustainable, in my opinion, goal rather than talking about do dialogue, but be dialogic with each other.
What you're saying, whatever the future aftermath is, you have to start with rebuilding real I-thou relationships.
I would like to start before the destructive conflict, before it generates destruction, violence, discrimination, intolerance, and so forth.
You would not have a basis for the rest until you do that. Until you have.
What I'm saying is to build something that is different, that does not generate the destruction.
Yes.
I'd like to thank you for your presentations. My question is particularly addressed to Matthew Hodes of the United Nations. I sympathize with public servants like you who will always have to use very diplomatic language sometimes so that you don't tend to offend people. But building from your experience in the Balkans and in Somalia, my question is, are you anywhere close to laying hands on the question of whether religion is increasingly becoming a failure in terms of exercising restraint on people's attitude as a practice religion, especially in a society that is as complex as the Balkans or Rwanda. And then political rhetoric quickly ignites people to rise above those shared values and faith and everything into such overwhelming level of violence as the world had witnessed in the Balkans and even in Rwanda.
It may be better for us to view this particular issue as one would look at any potential contributing factor to a conflict setting, as opposed to here's a person, we can do something about this person, or we can do something about this church, or we can do something about this mosque, or we can do something about this synagogue. The feelings that exist, again, in any particular setting are going to be unique to that setting. The question of whether or not the issue of religion, say in the Balkans, has now been addressed or resolved, I think is a difficult one to talk about. Again, because things don't stand still. Life is dynamic. History is dynamic. If I go to Sarajevo tomorrow, there's this enormous mosque right near the edge of the center of the city that did not exist 20 years ago. An outside power paid for the construction of a very large mosque. The small community mosques that characterized normal Bosnian Muslim culture in the era before the war, some of them are still there, some of them are in disrepair. It's just not the same anymore. The Jewish community in Sarajevo was small but thriving before the war. It essentially no longer exists. Most of the people who could get their family out did during the siege, and most of them have not come back. And so I think in any given setting, you have to be careful about the characterization of being able to fix a particular problem, as opposed to address ongoing conditions and trying to make your gains where you find them, as you find them, to the fullest extent that you can find them.
Yeah, if I can just add a word, because I heard the word, is religion failing, and I think the answer is yes, but I don't think that's the whole answer. I like to look at these, even the term root causes, which is widely used and is important. I think as important is the idea of a multiplicity of causes, a holistic approach, that all of these kind of stakeholder factors are at play. Good governance or corruption at the political level. I see religion as no different from private sector institutions, government institutions, and civil society institutions, equally prone to corruption, equally prone to ignorance, and all these factors. So it behooves everybody working in all the sectors to look toward improvement. And I take a word that, again, our interfaith amigos brought out, is we need not only to exercise critical thinking vis-a-vis the other, but critical self-reflection. It's very hard because we tend to be blind to what we think is just so transparently, absolutely, clearly black and white, whatever, true and right. And we form tribes around that, and we reinforce one another. And this is not a religious phenomenon. It's with sport teams, it's with political parties, it's with many human associations, families, and tribes. So we live in a complex world, and I just think we need to continually remind ourselves of that, and in seeking solutions, I think that's why we need these comprehensive analysis of what's the problem, or the problems, or the roots, plurally speaking, and what are the multiplicity of ways to try to bring solutions. And everybody has some assets they can bring, and everybody has some tendencies toward pathology that should be avoided.
I'm still bridling at the idea that I can't get a cookie-cutter, easy solution. I'll give you just one quick. I was mediating in the Bronx Civil Court, and after 10 minutes, the judge said, "Aren't you finished yet?" So.
I just want to thank very much all the speakers for what you have contributed each, because each contribution adds up to a kind of a mosaic about what's going on. But I'm a little concerned that no one has really addressed the issue of economics and land and stuff that I know that one of the speakers said there are different causes. But these issues are at the core of the conflicts in the world. Nobody has addressed colonialism. Nobody has addressed the taking of people's lands. You know, this is, because, again, one of the speakers also said you go to, I don't remember where, but people were living in those communities, some for centuries. And they may have had conflicts, but not the extent that the conflicts have been since the last 500 years, when European nations have just gone all over the world and appropriated people's lands and imposed cultures that were not the original cultures, so that people have difficulties practice. And I know that things happened before, but we need, if interfaith people talk about the dialogues and all of that without addressing those issues, and some people have addressed the issue of gaps in wealth and so on, but this is at the core. When people's means of survival are taken from them, and when they have difficulty practicing their old traditions, there's going to be conflict in the world until these things are addressed. And I mean, I don't want to take up the time, but I'm concerned about that. Thank you.
That's going to have to be our last. We can continue discussing more, but this will be have to be our last question. And so maybe in response, I can ask the panel to do a little summing up, because what you asked does call for a summing up. I really think so. So would anybody like to respond in that way?
I just want to say that I don't think anybody would disagree. I think we were sort of charged with discussing the religious aspects of conflict and of conflict resolution, and not trying to outline all the causes of conflict in the world. And I would just say, from my own point of view, that I think all of these things sometimes require different expertise, and at least it wasn't my expertise. And just as one summary comment, I would just say that, like to echo again the statement that every conflict is different, but that the one thing that we can bring to, from our side, that we can bring to it, is at least a sense of how to discuss these questions civilly, how to work through at least the religious sides that we're talking about here with one another in a way that tries to move us in the right direction, instead of, unfortunately, what we sometimes see, where the religion is used to move in the wrong direction. So I think that's what we would like to see.
Okay, just a quick word on the shift. I think it is true. Economics is one of the critical factors that are at play. I think the other thing that I think we should be aware of is, anytime we make the shift, like we say, well, the religion, it's just impossible, but if we move to ethics, we can really get down to a very clear mathematical understanding of what justice is, and we'll all agree. But believe me, go to the most sophisticated department of philosophy or theology in any of the greatest institutions in the world, and you will find fierce and dramatic and profound disagreement at the supremely highest level of intellectual, passionate, and moral inquiry. It doesn't all just flow together and everybody means the same thing by justice and has the same historical perspective on justice. If you found that, and the same with economics, so the dialogue of life applies not just to religion. Go to an economics department, unless it's a kind of a ruling orthodoxy, they're classical, neoclassical, Marxist, liberal, communitarian, all ranges of economic theories and theories of history that will open up, believe me, an extremely fruitful and diverse and wide. That's why I think humility is a critical factor, the capacity to listen and to challenge one's own taken for granted assumptions, something that religious people are offering, but sometimes people that talk in ethical language are, oh, that must be true. But actually, there are a lot of assumptions and factors that play in any range or sphere of discourse. So just throw that out there.
Any more summing up?
Yes, please. Economics, human dignity. We can ask ourselves as people of faith, is there any reason why some community in some distant place that, well, we don't even have to travel from the United States at this point because we have Flint, Michigan, you know, staring us in the face. But when people can't find clean water, you know, or food or medical care, we are looking at now the specter of Dakota and the Standing Rock people. These are, we don't have to be experts to understand that something is very, very wrong. And what is it in our hearts that tell us, that move us to add, you know, Islam tells us that there are 3 degrees, right? One, if you see an evil, and at some point we will all be able to converge and say, oh, well, that looks like evil, right? Even though we might have variances here and there. But at some point we'll be able to say, that's not right. Somehow it's not right. So what does our faith call us to do? You know, do we speak about it? Can we stop it if we have the wherewithal? If we not, at least we have to feel something is not balanced. So that's on us as people in the world. We have to figure out how are we complicit in this imbalance, and then be willing to make the necessary changes, right, at the communal level, our neighbor next to us, right, that this will not happen on my block, in my building, or in my house, in my town, and then move out and try to make a change. Find someone else who's doing similar work, but we have to move out of the comfort zone. We know what injustice looks like at the fundamental level, and it's not a very big theological, sophisticated discussion. I mean, in this world, nobody should be starving. Nobody should be starving. Everybody should have clean water. And yeah, occupation, domination, and control are at the root of our perverted ego trips. And if and until we address that, and this becomes the place where the UN might not be the place to have this conversation, but at some point it'll reach a level where you can have that conversation, and you must have that conversation. But we as people in the community have to have that question, and it's not about polite society at this point, because our lives and the lives of our children are in danger every day, and we're responsible for that.
What the last questioner was alluding to, and frankly, we've seen it described in other ways from other questioners, is an issue that I think the UN is starting to address in greater detail, and that Sister Aisha is pointing out. It has to do with two words: inequality and disparity. Disparity in the sense that there are power disparities that exist between communities, between groups, between portions of society, and inequality in that we're starting to see that as the fundamental challenge on the development agenda that the UN and the 193 member countries who have all signed on to the Sustainable Development Goals have acknowledged. And so today we're talking about this in the context of conflict, and these two issues apply here too. In most cases, conflicts come down to one group trying to dominate, trying to exercise power over another, whether it's because of a sense of disenfranchisement or a sense of desire to control or dominate. Those are all different questions that are addressed in different places. But the fundamental problem of inequality and power disparities is one that will continue to vex us. And it's also one where religious leaders can take solace in knowing that if they are promoting those shared values in the way that we heard described earlier this morning, that's one way to at least create an ethical barrier to their to the promotion of those two negative elements in society.
Thank you. Just want to thank Professor Art. He's our member and also a very important person in the organization right from the beginning, and our expert who has really inspired us. I also want to thank our keynote speakers, our panelists, for the great inspirational, powerful, motivational contributions they've made to this very important topic. But again, what we're doing is shared values. We are in the process of sharing our values. It's going to be very unjust if we leave them without sharing our own values with them. But again, as the Latin adage says, nemo dat quod non habet, which means nobody gives what he does not have. And neither gold nor silver do we have, but what we have, we will give you. On that very note, we have very simple certificate of appreciation that we just want to give you for you to remember our organization when you go back to your various offices and workplaces. And we're going to begin with Professor Schiffman to hand over a very small certificate of appreciation to him.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We have another certificate of appreciation for Dr. Our great scholar who has also been leading us in this interfaith dialogue, Dr. Walsh. We want to invite Sister Aisha, who accepted to share with us very important speeches and motivational speeches. I'm going to come over here.
Okay, that would be great.
And lastly, but not the least, most importantly, we have a great person for the United Nations. It's not easy to work at the United Nations, and also lead the Alliance for Civilizations, which is one of the important organizations that is leading the interfaith work at the United Nations. So I want to give this to Mr. Matthew